Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Stats and Scheme. I'm Seth. I'm here with Shawn Syed. Got another great week of really good football to talk about. Shawn, we have lots of things to discuss. What do you want to talk about first?
First, come on. I mean, happy Halloween. We're recording on Halloween Day. Got to really quickly talk about some costumes. When I was younger, I was quite young, so I will say I was dressed up as Chad Pennington, which is kind of like a hilarious note on history, considering Chad Pennington. I grew up in New Jersey, and you said you had some costume you wanted to talk about. I don't see it on the notes, so I don't know. You told me it was a funny story. I guess we can all be the judge of that, but let us hear what was the costume you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, a Chad Pennington costume is hilarious. I hope you have a picture of that somewhere that I can look at. My funny story about Halloween and like kind of football related is like my mom told me when I was probably like 8 or 9 years old. She's like, "Oh, like you can go as a lion this year for Halloween." I'm like, "Oh, cool. That means I'm gonna get like a Calvin Johnson jersey, Matthew Stafford jersey, like one of those." She meant the lion from like Wizard of Oz, like like an actual lion. So I had to end up going as that. Was not that happy, but ended up getting a lot of candy. And then like my favorite part about Halloween as a kid was trading candy afterwards with my friend. Like if I didn't like certain candies, I was trading that. And then we're sitting here today on the trade deadline. So, very similar parallel there for sure.
Wow. I mean, I didn't know what was coming from you. That is really good. Tough luck. Mama Seth, I know is a loyal listener to our podcast and an ardent supporter. So we appreciate her, even if you had to go as a lion. And lions, tigers. Oh my, from the Wizard of Oz. Which let's get out of Halloween talk. Talk about the Bengals. Have to start with them in a big win over the 49ers. It was really great to see Joe Burrow just looking healthy and playing at the high level that we know he has in him. I thought pocket mobility is really his superpower, even if it's subtle movements that get him into better throw situations. But against the 49ers, I mean, he was shaking guys off. They were like draped all over his back. And then he was able to take off running where it seemed like he was able to check into that quarterback draw where, to me, you're not doing that unless you're really at full strength or really able to kind of feel your running ability at a high level. The Bengals were also able to introduce some more under center stuff this week where they just couldn't do that because of Burrow's calf injury. And obviously it doesn't have just a linear recovery, but it's a lot easier for an offense to have that option where you can get to runs to both sides a little bit easier. You can encourage the defense to be in single high and then get into your boot game off of that. And then they found multiple different ways to run trap, which takes advantage of that aggressive up the field attacking 49ers defensive line. So I really liked what I saw from the Bengals. Tej, why don't you, as long as you can get past that Lions story, why don't you tell us what you saw kind of from that Bengals offense in general, what the numbers said?
I'm so glad you brought up the pocket mobility. When you looked at Joe Burrow and you saw him playing at not 100% early in the season, you could really see that's what was missing from the Bengals offense was that pocket mobility. And that's why Joe Burrow is a very good NFL quarterback, but him playing injured versus other quarterbacks playing injured might not produce high-end results because of how much he relies on that pocket mobility. And then he really was able to get into that in this game. And I think now we're at the stage of the season with the Bengals where we're going to basically have to do this every year, it seems like, where we kind of have to throw out the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season as they get going. And then they start really cooking, especially in the passing game at this point in the season every year. And that usually continues for the rest of the year. I've been really impressed with Zach Taylor and how much he's let Joe Burrow cook and throwing to Jamar Chase and different things like that. The only game of the season where the Bengals have had a negative pass rate over expected so far was week 1 against the Browns. Since then, they've had 6 straight games with a positive pass rate over expected, including plus 22% pass rate over expected against the Seahawks in week 6. And then against San Francisco last week, it was plus 11% pass rate over expected. When you looked at how offenses were playing San Francisco, because of how good their pass defense is with the linebackers and the pass rush they have, and their run defense being good, but not at that level of their pass defense, offenses were passing more than they usually did normally against the 49ers. But Zach Taylor threw that out. He knew that what he had advantage-wise with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and really leaned into that in this game.
Yeah, I really like the way the Bengals use Jamar Chase because he gets used in so many different ways. And it feels like this whole episode is kind of the like, hey, you need to just spam your wide receiver 1 button the whole entire game episode. I'm sure when we talk about the Eagles a little bit later, but they'll put Jamar Chase on the outside where he is so fast. Like, I think that's something that we don't really talk about because he's not Tyreek Hill and playing in that same way. And we see so many of those back shoulder fades, but the way he's able to threaten defensive back to vertical it's scary on the defensive side. And then he can draw those pass interference flags on those back shoulder fades. They'll put him in the backfield sometimes to, just draw eyes from the defense, or they'll motion him behind the formation and they can, throw a bubble to him. And then they hit the 49ers with a little bubble and go where Chase is kind of that inside receiver on that look. And he has such a unique skill set. So seeing what the offense does with him on a week-to-week basis, especially as Joe Burrow is healthy, it's just like fun. It's fun in the AFC, especially as, other teams, they're still finding their footing. So, it feels a little different this year where it's, you could say the Chiefs are the best team, but there just seems like a little bit more unevenness, which to me is more fun to watch tape every week because there's just more teams I think are trying different things or feel like they really have a legitimate chance. And one thing that I don't know how repeatable it is, but the Bengals, they did a really good job breaking tackles against the 49ers. They'll run a lot of those really simple RPOs where it's numbers based or it's leverage based or, hey, we're just getting the ball out quick. Let's get our receiver in space. And there was a situation, I think it was like a 3rd and 1 or a 3rd and 3 where ball goes to Chase. It looks like it's an easy defensive stop. They can get a kind of even tackle and force them to 4th down. Chase breaks a tackle. He works through another one and gets that 1st down. So those sort of hitting yards are something that, I don't know, maybe the 49ers, they just had a bad week. They were thinking about their Halloween costumes or whatever. But it's just, it's unfortunate to see that for a defense where, of course, they were so dominant last week. I do expect them. I'm sure they'll continue to pick things up. But that tackling and then just the way the Bengals have a kind of like collegey offense in a few different ways was interesting to see what issues that presented for the 49ers defense.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the Jamar Chase thing was big. Against the 49ers, you want to avoid the middle of the field because of how good their linebackers are. So when you look at the Bengals target distribution in this game, Jamar Chase got 5 targets to the right, 4 targets to the left, and then only 2 targets over the middle of the field. So they were kind of avoiding the middle of the field with him, and they knew that they could kind of pick on the 49ers outside corners. And like what you talked about with the 49ers defense, that's also a really interesting point where I think it's great when you have a really good defense in the NFL, but something that we've talked about on this show before and we've mentioned on Twitter as well is usually defensive metrics are more descriptive than predictive. It's more descriptive of the opposing offenses that you've played and how well you've played, but it's hard to sustain an elite defense throughout the whole season. And we're kind of seeing that from the 49ers defense right now, where they're still very talented. They still can play well from time to time, but they are starting to let up more points than usual. They allowed a 94th percentile success rate in this game, a 90th percentile EPA per play from the Bengals offense against the 49ers defense. So I think they'll be fine in the long run, but when they do play these high-end offenses like the Bengals or even a team like the Vikings 2 weeks ago where they have a pretty good offense, like the 49ers are showing some weakness in that regard, but overall I think they'll still be fine.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think they're going to be fine. It's you make a good point. There's so much variance on the defensive end, whether it's you throw up a 50-50 ball, sometimes it lands in the receiver's hands, sometimes the defense is able to make a play on it. Be interesting to see if the 49ers are movers at the trade deadline. We're recording this before the trade deadline, whether they, add someone to the defensive line room or add a cornerback or something of that nature. But yeah, I just think they're going to be fine. They have so much talent, and it's easier when the defense is playing from ahead and the offense is just rolling and the defense can really get that pass rush going. So as we move over to the offensive side of the ball for the 49ers, of course, a few weeks ago, I certainly thought they were just absolutely invincible, but now they have Trent Williams injured. They have Deebo Samuel injured. They've lost, 3 games in a row now? They head into their bye. I do want to talk about Trent Williams first because he's so special as a left tackle, not only in pass protection, but if you're running outside zone to the right side, he could just cut off the backside defenders so well. And a lot of those outside zone runs, they end up as home runs, not only when you win on the front side, but really when you're able to cut off the back half of that defense, because outside zone, it's a stretch and cut sort of run. So you want to stretch the front half of the defense, cut that backside off, and give your running back an alley. Of course, we shouldn't take anything away from what I think was a really good Bengals performance. As I said, when Deebo Samuel is not there, the 49ers, they're not able to stay in their 21 personnel kind of death lineup the same way. And then your secondary ball carrier, it's a little bit of a drop off because it's not that star in Deebo Samuel. So when you have Christian McCaffrey on that orbit motion and you get into your kind of like wing T spin series and hand off inside, it doesn't have the same impact. But the Bengals put on really good tape up front this week. DJ Reader is someone we were mentioning again here on the interior defensive line, and I thought Trey Hendrickson really helped seal the game over that left tackle. So how'd you feel about the Bengals defense against the 49ers offense in this one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really liked a lot of the points that you brought up. And that's what was a little bit worrying to me about the Bengals defense early in the season was, did they have any true stars on the defense that could take over games? We like to look at defense at like minimizing the amount of weak links that you have. The Bengals have done the best job in the league at that the past couple seasons with Lou Anarumo and like the pieces that he's worked with on defense. But you take Jesse Bates away, you take Von Bell away, like things start to trickle down for the Bengals defense here. But this game was another reminder, like how good DJ Reader is, how good some of these pieces on the Bengals defense can play when they're playing in synergy. And then Lou Anarumo getting a bye week to come up with a game plan here that kind of reminded me of some of his playoff game plans where he's able to create a game plan that is so specific on the opposition that he's able to slow them down. So I think it was a really good performance from the Bengals defense, and they were able to force turnovers in crucial spots, even though the 49ers had a 54% success rate in this game, which is a 90th percentile performance of the last couple of seasons. And they had an 8.2 yards per play. They also had a 12.5% negative play rate. So the Bengals were forcing these negative plays at the right moments when they needed to, especially in that fourth quarter to kind of seal the game here. So I think that was crucial for them as well.
Yeah, I mean, that is good to remember. Like the 49ers offense, it is so hard to stop. And sometimes the only way to stop that is, are you able to create some sort of explosive on the defensive end? I like when you were talking about kind of who are the stars on the Bengals defense, like Mike Hilton as a nickel blitzer is just always so fun to watch. He is such a willing run defender. And then when you're nickel defender, we talked about it with Brian Branch earlier in the season for the Lions, like it gives you so much versatility. And I'm sure Brian Branch would be happy to have, a long career as a nickel player like Mike Hilton. And I do think the Bengals had a really cool snap where they end up doubling Christian McCaffrey outside, and Purdy ended up escaping on it and gaining yards. But I don't know how many receivers are running backs are you going to see that are double teamed like that to get that respect was pretty cool. And I mean, of course, we got to talk about Brock Purdy. I do think over the last two games, Purdy's actually done a lot of good in the offense. He is, he's had turnover worthy throws pretty much every game, I feel like, throughout his career. And this game, and then against the Vikings, now the defense is coming down with that ball. So that's what we remember. Instead, he had this awesome throw where he hits Kittle on a seam, who I'm pretty sure Kittle's really just an alert. He's not the whole target of the progression. The defense is rotating to cover two. So usually you're finding an inbreaker with anticipation there, but hitting Kittle on the seam was awesome. And he's still able to hit those inbreakers on other plays. I do think on that first interception, the linebacker does a really nice job kind of carrying the route vertical, but continuing to work inside because the 49ers run so many of those inbreakers. And a lot of the times, Purdy's just thrown to a wide open Brandon Ayuk, but the linebacker gets to that spot. And that was a really good job by the Bengals. And I do think the 49ers passing game as a whole, right? It's created to conflict linebackers underneath, make their life super hard. It really benefits from the threat of the run, the threat of play action, and then all those weapons. So no team wants to play from behind, but sometimes it feels like this passing offense particularly, it's really structured to take advantage of those neutral game script opportunities. Again, I do think like he's playing well. There's not these huge glaring issues, but then I can't just talk about it and pretend those turnovers didn't happen. So how'd you feel about Purdy in the passing game in this one?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Like whether you look at interceptable passes like FTN data has or other various data sources that chart similar things, like Purdy's always ranked highly in those types of throws, but the aggressiveness can pay off sometimes. 49ers were really explosive in this game through the passing game, but then you have the trade-off of the negative plays of what happens when Purdy's interceptable throws actually do get intercepted by the defense. And we're seeing that in the other direction. And that's often what happens in football and these types of things is the pendulum swings too far in the other direction when a team like the 49ers is going through these types of struggles where they still had a 95th percentile success rate against the Vikings, even though there were some turnovers there and some concussion things that we don't have too much information on. And then in this game, they had a 90th percentile success rate on offense. So if they're still able to, from a play-to-play basis, if they're able to generate positive EPA plays, if they're able to put themselves closer to scoring, which they've done a pretty good job of these past couple weeks, I think they'll also be fine in the long run. But you might have to deal with Purdy's interceptable passes actually getting intercepted more often than earlier in the season and the season before that, just because positive regression to the mean there. So that'll be really interesting to follow for the 49ers, is kind of how they deal with that, whether they peel back some of the aggressiveness on the offense. But like you said, like, I don't really want them to, because I think those throws to George Kittle over the middle of the field, and when they get Deebo Samuel back, he'll be kind of in a similar middle of the field targeted area. Like, those are the types of throws that really makes the 49ers offense go. And as long as you have Brandon Ayuk holding down the fort on some of the other stuff, I think you'll be fine when you mix in some of the other pieces of McCaffrey and Deebo and Kittle.
Yeah, I mean, Ayuk he is such a fun route runner. He just has
Crazy.
just an absurd amount of athleticism, the way he's able to get in and out of those cuts. And like, I think Purdy has really, really good rapport with him. And I do think he has like an awesome rapport with George Kittle. And then as you get to those, not replacement level, but the next player up after Deebo gets injured, it seems like Purdy doesn't have the same level of kind of meshing with them. And I think he really knows where Ayuk's going to be, when he's going to be there. And for those other guys, maybe it seems like they just, it makes sense. If you don't rep with someone all the time, it's going to be a little bit different. But the Bengals, they sweep the NFC West. Let's move east to the NFC East. Going to talk about the Cowboys, that big win over the Rams. Early in the season, the Cowboys offense, it felt a little up and down. I think that they also just like don't play a regular game. So sometimes it's hard on tape when the defense is scoring multiple touchdowns, or you have the 49ers game where there's just not a lot of those base game situations, where I feel like sometimes it's a little bit easier for when I watch us to have done more on the offensive end in their last two games. I do think Dak is playing really well. He is throwing so confident, kind of up that seam area. I just can't believe how some of his balls get to those receivers. I also like what I've seen in the last 2 weeks between how much he's moved off his spot in the pocket and then how he's executed. Probably want always to just, build the plane out of, hey, can Dak get out of the pocket and then make a play? You'd certainly want him to win inside of the pocket, but he can. So that's not a concern for me at all. Maybe he just, has a little more confidence in his ankle this year than last year. I do think that Dallas started to use a bit more motion. My guess is that the numbers for motion would be the most against the Rams than any of the other weeks. And it's just, you gain information from motion, whether they'll move CeeDee Lamb halfway to the right and then back inside. Are you seeing some man or zone tell? Are you able to change matchups a little bit? And we'll talk a lot about CeeDee Lamb, but Tej, what you got on the Dallas offense for this one?
Mm-hmm. I like a lot of the points that you laid out. I do agree that Dak Prescott is playing at a really high level right now. His performance against the Rams, looking at it from a total EPA perspective, was the 19th best performance of the season. And I mean, he didn't even have to do much in the second half. The game was over pretty quickly, like you said, because of the Rams special teams the Cowboys special teams and defense doing really well in this game. And it really goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show, targeting your wide receiver one. You can't do it on every play for obvious reasons, but the more that you do it, the more beneficial it is for your offense. Dallas gave Michael Gallup a shot early in the season, and he's just not what he used to be pre-injury. And I think that's really unfortunate, because he was a really special player pre-injury, but he's probably 75% of what he was before then, which in the NFL, where margins are really thin, that's very crucial. So when you look at CeeDee Lamb and just how much he gets targeted, when CeeDee Lamb gets targeted, it has a 62.5% success rate. When Michael Gallup gets targeted, the play has a 45.7% success rate. So there's a huge gap between Lamb and Gallup there. So I think the Cowboys offense is going to start to move towards even more CeeDee Lamb, using that motion to get him in advantageous situations and not always giving away a tendency from where he's lined up. And then we can also see some success from Jake Ferguson and even Kevontae Turpin. I think Turpin saw an increase in this game, and I think Dak Prescott is a very cerebral quarterback, and he's going to be able to go through his progressions and be able to see all of this play out. And the Cowboys' run game hasn't even been that good this year. I think they were hoping, and we were kind of hoping as well, that it would be better. And obviously Tony Pollard has had some ups and downs and his own injuries as well, but when you can have this type of Dallas pass game week in, week out, like they've been having the couple weeks since that 49ers game, I think you have to feel really excited about them.
The Cowboys offensive line, they faced a bunch of injuries this year too. I'm sure they're still trying to get to 100%. And yeah, I'm glad we mentioned the CeeDee Lamb thing because it's fun to me. I've like watched the Eagles every week, and the Cowboys and Eagles, that's like a fun just offenses to think about where, yeah, throw the ball to AJ Brown every time. Throw the ball to CeeDee Lamb every time. Like we don't have to pretend that we need to, mix and match, get this person in, get this person in, because when it comes down to it, you do want to press your best matchup. And I think I don't want to talk ahead for the Eagles, but the Eagles have like a lot of other options, whether it's Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, different ways to get other people the ball. Yeah, the Cowboys really have to lean on CeeDee Lamb, and we're used to seeing Lamb kind of in that innermost spot in trips where he's on the line, and a lot of the times he's either isolating on a linebacker when they get to empty, or if they're not, then he's running that kind of crosser route. But defenses find good ways to double that receiver and force you to win on the outside in other ways. So I like that the Cowboys, they put Lamb in different spots this week. They're running him on different routes. They're putting him on the outside more. And it's better to me when you're seeing more than just, hey, CD's kind of running that crosser across the field. And I mean, I just can't wait for the matchup for the Eagles. We'll get there. We will talk about that. Let's just talk about the Dallas defense before we get to kind of reviewing the Eagles. And I know we're both just chomping a bit to talk about their matchup between Cowboys and Eagles. I really don't know where to start with the Cowboys defense. They're so attacking. They compress the pocket. They compress pass coverage by playing man. And it's so hard. Like you can't take your eyes away from number 11 because Micah Parsons is so good. He continues to line up in different spots along the line. He's going to make you change your protection. They did something against the Rams where they kind of lined those guys up wider, but there's still another defender outside. So pretty much like Micah has a longer way to go, but he's against the guard. So you're kind of turning the guard into a tackle. And then the Rams have to, move a running back up there. They have to slide the center towards him. And there are other people on the defensive line are very good. So it's not like you can just say, okay, if we double and triple Michael Parsons, then we can stop the Dallas defensive line, because they force you into one-on-ones with those 5-man fronts. They'll walk a linebacker up. They'll stunt you all day long. They'll make you pass things off. And then, in their like kind of big nickel package, where as your nickel defender, you have more of a safety type body in there, they're really strong against the run because their safeties can play like linebackers. So they're versatile up front in the run and pass game. I think they know that they can win up front, so it allows them to be a little bit more aggressive on the back end. And then, I think Dan Quinn's doing it, just continue to do a great job and evolving and getting into a little bit of split safety stuff, some kind of momentary switches to cover 2 and things that we really enjoy. So Dallas defense is like exhausting to watch on film. So at the same time with the 49ers defense, because it's like these guys just hit so hard. It's like, wow, like, I'm glad that we get to just talk into a mic and don't have to worry about just all those just injuries. So talk to us about the Dallas defense a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, aggressive is a great way to describe it. It seems like they have a lot of control over the game, and like it stems from what you mentioned. You have Micah Parsons, you have Stephon Gilmore. You're hoping that Trevon Diggs would be there, but obviously he went down with injury. But you still have your 2 kind of players in the defense that the rest of the players are going to revolve around. So when you have a game like Deron Bland had in this game, that's exactly what you want to see from this Dallas defense. Deron Bland, I think, played really well in this particular game against the Rams, but is also having a pretty good season in general. You've Jaron Kearse, who plays a ton of snaps for the Cowboys and is able to hold down that particular defensive back spot. And then, like you mentioned with the defensive line, like when you have other defensive linemen like DeMarcus Lawrence and even Dorrance Armstrong, who I think has played pretty well this year and has come in expected pass situations and is able to create pressure and sacks and different stuff like that. Like those secondary defensive pieces for Dallas are what keeps this defense playing at a high level, because like Parsons is almost always going to play really well. Gilmore is almost always going to play really well. But when Dan Quinn can really just unleash some of the other players that you have on this defense and, have them make big plays and tackle really well, like I think that's what makes Dallas's defense so much fun to watch so far this season.
Yeah. All right. Let's keep moving, go through Eagles Commanders real quick so we can spend more time on Eagles Cowboys. And the Eagles, they sit at 7-1. They've really ramped up to this next stretch of 6 games where they have the Cowboys, Chiefs, Bills, 49ers, Cowboys again, and then the Seahawks. So I'm sure we're going to talk about the Eagles a ton on here because they have just such great matchups coming out. I particularly can't wait for that Eagles 49ers game. That's going to be so much fun. On the offensive side, I think Jalen Hurts is also playing at a super high level right now. He is really banged up with that knee injury, but like we said, he is comfortable pressing that matchup advantage over and over. And AJ Brown is, I mean, he's just on such a heater, and he does win in different ways where he can take that short in route and break tackles. He can beat you over the top, of course, and high point the ball since that's so threatening. And then they'll run a route where he's kind of running a vertical. He stutters like he's stopping, and then he gets out of it. So it looks like a stutter go, but then he'll stop again. Where, I mean, what are you supposed to do as a defensive back there? They threw a touchdown to him against 2-man, which is like 5-man defenders underneath, and then 2 kind of deep half safeties, where that's like a 7-on-7 defense that you just shouldn't be able to throw touchdowns against that. But obviously when the ball's in the air, it feels like it's coming to AJ Brown every time. So build the whole entire plane out of AJ Brown for the Eagles, even though they were able to find Devontae Smith a bunch in this game, found a little bit more space in their RPO game this week. They had a nice little wrinkle where kind of 2 receivers close together, then the inside receiver will motion out, kind of like that Dolphins motion, and then that person becomes the blocker for the outside defender when the now inside receiver is running a bubble. So just a little bit way to change up the leverage there. I think it gave them an advantage, and it just forces the defense to communicate. They fumbled twice inside the 10-yard line. So for the sake of turnover variance, hopefully that kind of evens out against the Cowboys. But how'd you feel about the Eagles offense against the Commanders?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we spend all this time. I spend all this time looking at data. You spend all this time watching film. At the end of the day, if you have a top 10 receiver, just throw to them. Very simple when you break down football like that. But I'm totally with you on AJ Brown. He is playing like an offensive player of the year right now. Him and Tyreek Hill are currently tied for total EPA when targeted. 3 weeks ago, Tyreek Hill was lapping the field. I think he was even double of what AJ Brown was. AJ Brown has just been insane these last couple of weeks and has ended up tying with him. He's also third in yards per route run, and he has 70 routes more than Tyreek Hill on the season. So you usually see efficiency go down with volume, and AJ Brown has had to play a lot late into games while Tyreek Hill hasn't. So it's very impressive to me that AJ Brown is close to Tyreek Hill with 70 routes run more on the year. But yeah, I mean, when you look at the Eagles' target separation last year, AJ Brown was the wide receiver 1, Devontae Smith was the wide receiver 2, but their target share was pretty similar. Like it wavered between 2 to 4% throughout the season. This year, there's a decent sized gap in target share between AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. The Eagles are completely leaning into AJ Brown, and I think Devontae Smith has played well for most of the season, especially in particular games, but has also had his struggles that weren't as high as last season. And so now you're seeing Dallas Goedert fill in some of the gaps for the Eagles, and then even DeAndre Swift as a receiver has been getting targeted a decent amount as well, even if it isn't as successful as some of the other receivers. You still want that safety valve there. So that's why it's not going to be as successful. So just like the whole arsenal of options that the Eagles have right now, but it really stems from AJ Brown just being that alpha wide receiver 1 that has been able to generate some of the most yards after catch in the league. I think he's up there in yards after catch over expected if you're using that type of metric, but also have some of those big air yards plays as well where he's able to catch balls downfield.
Yeah, and if you're going to rotate your whole entire defense to AJ Brown, I feel very confident that Devontae Smith can continue to win those matchups. I think he was like 7 for 99 in this game. Also, just, I mean, not like a stats and scheme note. I just think he's just like incredibly unselfish, or at least he seems that way in all of his interviews and stuff. Because yeah, if you're a stud receiver and then AJ Brown is just getting all these receptions over and over again, I do think, the Eagles do a good job really internally handling just the different personalities of a football team, which they're just a really well-run organization. I do think on the offensive side, it was cool to see Hurts where he, I think, understood, okay, I can't escape as much in this game. Just confidently take those checkdowns where the Eagles are using DeAndre Swift out of the backfield just in more fun ways. They definitely see him as a weapon. Let's see. They fumbled twice, and then they showed that the push sneak sweep. So that was a really nice one where, I mean, how do you defend that play? Like if you're going to clog up the A and B gaps and have a linebacker jump over the top, now they run that sweep to the outside. Where last year they ran a pitch to that side. I like the sweep because now you have an extra lead blocker there. And I don't know, Tej, do you have any thought on, like, should you hold that for the Cowboys game, or do you think it's better? All right, this is on film. Now, if you're a Cowboys defender, you're sweating that. a little bit. Would you have hit that one, or do you like that they ran it against the Commanders?
I'm glad that you brought that up because that was my first thought too, was like, oh, we knew this was coming at some point where they were going to fake the sweep or, fake the tush push, end up giving it to the sweep. But I was surprised they used it in that spot because I'm not necessarily sure that they had to use it in that spot. I think I would have held it for the Cowboys game because that would have, especially with what we were just talking about with the Cowboys over aggressive defense, like, that they would have been so excited to try to like actually be the team that is able to stuff Jalen Hurts on that play, and the Eagles just run that fake off of it. I saw Oregon State do that earlier this year. Jonathan Smith, I think one of the better play callers in college football, where they ran the tush push in the first quarter against Utah, and it was successful on 4th and 1. Fourth quarter, get into the same formation, basically same exact situation, run a sweep off of it. It goes for like a 40 or 50-yard touchdown. So it's cool to see how things can trickle up and trickle down between the NFL and college football. How about you? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Would you have used that play there in that spot, or would you have saved it?
Yeah, I feel like this is one where we're just gonna go like strictly results based. So like if the tush push works a little bit better next week, then we can say, oh, maybe they put an extra defender over there. And then if they try another wrinkle off it and don't get it. So I'm just punting the question because I really don't know. I could definitely convince myself either way because you want to rake that out in a huge moment. But now if you're using that constraint play to force them to play, which really one of your base plays in the regular push sneak, if they have to play that differently and opens it up, that is super advantageous. But then again, like they're converting there at like a 90% rate this year. So I don't know. I feel like soft lean towards maybe holding it. They tried something earlier against the Bucks this year, just like on the goal line where they tried kind of a fake out of it. I'm sure they'll have another wrinkle, and it's always fun to see Nick Sirianni smiling on the sidelines. Let's talk about the defense super quick. If you want to see exactly how to break a defense with bunch sets, just watch both Commanders games against the Eagles. I think Eric Bieniemy did a great job in both games, designing it super, super well. The Eagles, of course, added Kevin Byard last week. So he played every single snap, which I think it's probably fair to assume that the coverage menu was at least a little bit simplified. They had a nice snap where they're kind of showing man coverage with a linebacker on a tight end on the edge of the formation. And then Darius Slay is following a motion and they end up getting into cover 2 there. So another thing that I think that's on Desai's menu now. And they have secondary communication issues where they're rotating slot defenders. They're still figuring things out on that end. They have like a 3-player rotation at linebacker, but they can still steal the game up front. So that's going to be a real fun thing. I just think, Bieniemy just a lot of fun to watch, especially in those bunch sets. You got anything on the Eagles defense, or do you think we should just go on to Cowboys Eagles?
Yeah, one thing, and I'm with you. I was surprised that Byard played so much. I was like, wow, first week with the new team, and he's already playing that much. I do think that's a testament to Shawn Desai and the Eagles defensive staff for getting him ready for that game. Byard had been playing one of the highest snap percentages in the whole league before he joined the Eagles. He was playing 90.7% of the Titans' defensive snaps, which was top 10, top 15, if I remember right off the top of my head. I think he's going to be pretty good with the Eagles. And it's trade deadline today. You're going to see a lot of teams maybe show some desperation, trade for players that doesn't fit their timeline and different things, and pay a decent amount of draft picks to do so. It's classic Eagles, classic Howie Roseman to get Kevin Byard when they did and for what they did. So I think that's definitely something to watch out for. But yeah, I think like this Eagles defensive back room is starting to come back a little bit now that you have Byard in there. You have your 2 outside corners, Slay, Bradbury, obviously, but like you can put a little bit more trust into Reed Blankenship as he gets more experience. And like you mentioned, like the defensive line is always going to be awesome, and that's always going to give them a high floor on defense. And it's it's what the secondary and the linebackers do in the back end that's going to give them the high ceiling.
Yeah, I think that Byard gets like a double bye week this year, where I'm pretty sure they had a bye week with the Titans and then he gets one with the Eagles. So, he's playing a ton of snaps. Let's make sure his legs stay fresh for later in the season, get him some rest there as well. I do think that Desai showed a little bit more versatility on the back end, even just by having Byard there, where now you can feel a little bit more comfortable where like which safety is dropping, which safety is going to be a deep half, who's kind of cutting across the field. So I'm excited to see as they all kind of settle in. But all right, we got to talk about Cowboys Eagles. It's going to be such a long Sunday we have the Dolphins Chiefs like super early. Ravens Seahawks is a really good game. Bengals, Bills at night. Tej, you were talking about college football before, which you know that we try not to let bleed into here. But what are you gonna do? Are you gonna sleep early on Saturday to wake up early for Sunday? How are you gonna deal with this week?
Yeah, so I actually agreed to go to a comedy show Saturday night, like months ago, before I realized that there were like a lot of good college football games Saturday night. LSU, Alabama is going to be the headliner. So I don't know if like, you kind of hope the comedian gets on stage early or something, low likelihood of that. So it might just be like a late to bed Saturday night, up early Sunday morning, like eyes on the TV at 9:30 Eastern for that kickoff. I feel bad for people on the West Coast, right? Like, are they going to be waking up at 6:30 to watch this?
Tej, you couldn't pay me to wake up at 6:30. So I mean, even being on Central Time, that 8:30 has me feeling a little bit rough already. We got a brother's birthday this weekend, but we'll get through it. Tough is our life, right? We have to plan out what time are we gonna wake up for an awesome football matchup. Yeah, so hopefully that comedy show goes quick. All right, let's get to it. Cowboys, Eagles. Why don't you lead off here? Just take us through some of the numbers. I saw you were digging into a bunch of good stuff on the Cowboys matchup with the Eagles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this game is going to be awesome, and going to probably have more detail on personnels and formations and different stuff like that in the weekend preview that I write and you basically rewrite for me every Friday. But I think this is going to be really interesting because when you look at what the one weakness of each of these teams are, it's the Cowboys' rush offense, and it's kind of it's the Eagles' rush defense. Kind of, they kind of split on defense right now. Cowboys have just been about an average team running the ball this year, and the Eagles have been about an average team stopping the run. But when you look at all the other matchups in this game, the Cowboys have a top 10 pass offense. The Eagles have a top 10 pass offense. Cowboys have a top 10 pass defense, and the Eagles' pass defense is starting to come around here, like we mentioned. But I think we're going to see a ton of passing in this game because of that. Both of these teams have a positive pass rate over expected on the season. And like we mentioned, they are just feeding their wide receiver ones right now in CeeDee Lamb and AJ Brown, respectively. So we saw a little bit of DeAndre Swift regression last week from a rushing perspective. I don't know if he was going to be able to keep up that high end of performance the entire season. So I think even more of a reason for the Eagles to pass in this game. So that's my overall read on the game is I think both teams come out, put a lot on their quarterbacks, put a lot on their passing offenses, and just kind of go out and try to air out the ball in this game.
Yeah, I lean towards that probably being the right way to look at the game because, as you said, I mean, let's press the AJ Brown button, let's press the CeeDee Lamb button, and let's kind of go from there. I do think the DeAndre Swift mention is interesting. I do actually think on film he is playing really, really well. But yeah, you're not going to have the game against the Vikings every single time. And the individual matchups in this game are just, I think they're going to be so fascinating. So the Eagles, they're on their second right guard right now. And then he was injured. Suapeta was injured this game. I think he came back. So they went to their third right guard, but now they have Cam Jurgens. I think he's going to come back off IR this week. But yeah, the Cowboys do a great job of lining Micah Parsons up along different spots on the defensive line. I can say with certain certainty that you're going to line up Micah Parsons over the right guard because that's the best matchup against an Eagles offensive line that is so good and just so much fun to watch every single week. I'm sure they'll slide Kelsey to Parsons in those situations, but then the Cowboys will respond to that by making sure they send 5, sometimes sending 6. And then do the Eagles go to empty? I do think they've had success out of it, and for whatever reason, I just like when the Eagles go to empty. I think it spreads things out a little bit more. The offensive line front is really good. They can figure out whatever is going on from the defense, so the Eagles are able to have success from empty. But can you pass protect against that defensive front? Eagles did a good job against Aaron Donald for most of the game, so I'm sure they'll have a plan in place for Parsons. But then Dan Quinn responding by moving him around the front is really fun. And then I think the Cowboys defensive line and linebackers are really good in the run game, where, as you said before, we talked a little about DeAndre Swift. The Eagles rush game has fallen off a bit. And I do think at least part of that is that Jalen Hurts is just not a threat in that run game at all right now with that knee injury. He's able to move well in the pocket every once in a while, but I don't think that they're going to have him, as a real threat to keep the ball. But against the Commanders, they knew that going in. And I think that allowed them to have kind of different RPOs in general to still stretch the defense horizontally when you have some sort of run inside. I will say, I think that the Cowboys, like, they match up better overall, just like a styles make fights things with the Eagles than the 49ers. Like, the 49ers game, it was such a buzzsaw game, but I do think that the Cowboys match up a little bit better here. How much do we see Stephon Gilmore matching up with AJ Brown? It feels like it looks like Stephon Gilmore against Julio Jones from earlier times, but I don't know. I guess you probably take AJ Brown in that matchup as much as possible. How much is it going to be a Devontae Smith game? Overall, I agree. Just a lot of passing in this game. I think that the Eagles haven't had to play against a ton of man coverage. Numbers could certainly tell me I'm wrong with that, but I feel like a lot of those wins are against zone coverage or finding different holes in the defense, then breaking tackles after the catch. So I don't know. I don't think the Cowboys are going to roll out some brand new coverage or anything. It's going to be so much an execution game on, if AJ Brown does make a catch, are you going to be able to tackle him? Or how many, pass rush wins are you going to have where maybe you can force a fumble? So overall, just a privilege to be able to watch this one coming up.
It really is. Yeah. And last year we didn't even get to see Dak Prescott versus Jalen Hurts because one of them was injured in either game. So that'll be cool to see in this game. Pulling the numbers on the empty point that you brought up for the Eagles perspective, the Eagles use empty on 12.8% of plays this year. They pass on 86% of the time they're in empty, which makes sense. But it does show a decent amount of Jalen Hurts designed runs too as well. And their pass out of empty is a little bit better than they're passing out a shotgun from an EPA perspective. So like you mentioned, like they have been pretty good passing out of empty this season. The Cowboys have only seen empty on 8.3% of defensive plays, so only 36 plays on the year. And even though it's a small sample size, they actually haven't been that good at defending empty passes. Like I think that it's their worst formation to it's the best formation for an opposing offense to pass against is empty against them. Cowboys are really, really good at defending shotgun passes. They're pretty good at defending single back passes, but they're allowing a positive EPA per pass out of empty. So that's probably the angle that we see the Eagles take in this game is increasing the amount of empty. Eagles do a really good job game planning and changing their game plans depending on the specific defense that they're playing. So I think that's what we're going to see out of this game as well.
Look at you, Tish, pulling up stats, doing fact checks in the middle of the show. That's a veteran move there. That's good work. I like that you mentioned the Eagles, they win in different ways on offense. Like you go 1 week, it's a Swift week. You go 1 week, it's an AJ Brown week, even though every week feels like an AJ Brown week. And then I think versus the Commanders, it was really a Jalen Hurts game as well. On the other side, with the Cowboys offense, like how do the Eagles defense or how do they deal with CeeDee Lamb? That's going to be the most interesting thing to me because they're not a team that really will follow with a cornerback as much as you might think. They did a little bit with Darius Slay against Cooper Kupp. They did it a little bit earlier with Justin Jefferson, but the offense was still able to have success in those situations. So I think that Shawn Desai would prefer to just kind of rotate the defense to that player or have those specialty coverages where you make sure you're playing half to their side, that they use that a little bit against Tyreek Hill. But CeeDee Lamb isn't a burner in the same way that Hill is. At the same time, he can beat you vertical with a lot of comfort. So that's going to be something I'm sure we'll talk about next week, especially if the Eagles find a way to win. Like, well, what do you do to deal with a team that really they're focusing their offense through one receiver, where maybe you feel a little bit more comfortable in those secondary and that third level matchup. But the Eagles, they're still figuring things out at that slot defender position. So particularly when CeeDee Lamb is in the slot, that's going to be something that I think my eyes are going to be a little more open, even if we wake up too early for that Chiefs Dolphins game and just wonder, well, is your nickel defender able to cover that player? Are the Cowboys able to find out different ways to get their formation where Lamb is matched up on a linebacker or really has a two-way go in those situations? And I do think the Eagles defensive line, I mean, they have an advantage against almost every offense just because they are so good. So agree, it's going to be a passing leaning game. And what CeeDee Lamb does in the game, I think is going to be super defining for the Cowboys offense.
Exactly. Yeah. I think we're going to learn a lot about the Eagles defense in this game. If their secondary is going to be able to hold up, if their run defense is going to be able to hold up as well. So that'll be really interesting. And, we do talk a lot about the Eagles on this show, and for good reason. One of the premier teams in the league, and you do a show about the Eagles every week with Sheil Kapadia that everyone should check out. And like, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording here, but the Eagles schedule over the next 6 weeks is about to be as much of a gauntlet as we've seen. The Cowboys in this game, they have Chiefs, Bills, 49ers, Cowboys again, and then Seahawks. So if you go to sumersports.com, you look at the league table, they are playing 4 of the top 5 teams in terms of ELO over their next 6 games here. The 49ers are the only team that they are not seeing. Oh, no, they are playing the 49ers. So they're actually playing all top 5 teams in terms of ELO over the next couple of games here. And the Seahawks are like the 11th best team in terms of ELO. So they're basically playing 6 top 10 teams here. So I'm sure we're going to be talking about them a lot here over the next couple of weeks as well.
Yeah, it's going to be so much fun because you get to learn so much about the teams. And then at the same time, like, we have to kind of measure ourselves because, what happens in week 9 is less important than what happens, obviously in the first round of the playoffs. But I know we both get excited about so many things. And Chiefs Dolphins, that's a hard thing not to be excited about. Let's get to the other matchups that we have on that long Sunday coming up. I think we're all curious to see what Kansas City does at the receiver position, whether it's just through the weeks over the season or if they make a move at the deadline. Obviously not sure if they do that. The Dolphins have Jalen Ramsey back, which was there. He had a nice interception against the Patriots this past week. I can't wait to see what Fangio starts to do with him there, whether he's using him at different positions or if Ramsey's at full strength, just able to fully kind of cancel out a receiver and lets Fangio get more fun on the front side of other concepts. The Kansas City receiver thing, I think a lot of people have talked about it this week. I know Eric Eaker sent a lot of tweets about it this week, but we talked about it last week where it's a position where it's more important for them to figure out through the season and say by the end of the time, say, okay, we're in week 18. Now we know who our best guys are because they have the privilege of having Patrick Mahomes, who plays at an insane level. And, he had the flu versus the Broncos. So I'm sure we could list a ton of excuses, but that matchup's going to be really fun where the Chiefs defense, they really want to play man coverage against you and get into some of those kind of like double coverages where they have both safeties bracketing players. So, maybe we see that against Hill and Waddle, but if anyone could break a double team, it's Tyreek Hill. So how are you feeling about that Chiefs Dolphins game? I think they're playing in Germany on Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like all that you laid out there. I think this game really comes down to Rashee Rice and what Vic Fangio ends up doing with Jalen Ramsey in this game. We saw Jalen Ramsey play a lot inside when he was with the Rams, and it's really cool to see him back and playing for the Dolphins here. Got the pick, early in that Dolphins Patriots game last week. And so, are they going to stick Ramsey on Kelsey and say, all right, like let's give our best shot to stopping Kelsey, and maybe we're going to try our secondary corners on Rashee Rice because he's really the only Chiefs receiver I think that could beat the Dolphins corners? Or do they stick Ramsey on Rice and they're going to say, we're going to accept that Kelsey's going to have 100 yards against us, but when we can muddy the waters, do we get a situation where the Chiefs receivers have to beat us outside of Rice? And we can kind of see from there, like if Sky Moore can beat us or if MVS can beat us. So I'm very curious to see that for sure. And from the other perspective, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how many offensive linemen for Miami are healthy coming into this game. If we see the same thing that we saw against Philly with you have 3 offensive linemen out, then I don't know how much they're going to be able to get into in this game of their deeper passing concepts, because the Chiefs defense is built to play this type of offense where they can take advantage of the offensive line. That's what Spags likes to do. When you have Chris Jones, that's what you specialize in. So that's what I'm also going to look out for throughout the week is who's healthy for the Dolphins. Are they able to play in this game? And if they are, I think the Dolphins can get into basically all the concepts they want to get into. If they're not healthy, though, maybe they lean on outside runs and try to stretch out this Chiefs defense that hasn't been that good against the run this year. And then they maybe turn back the dial on the passing game a little bit just because they're worried about all the sacks and pressure that'll be put on Tua, and it'll be harder to get to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle.
I do think that Mike McDaniel does a good job mitigating that pressure by their Dolphins, right? They're the one team that can still get the ball down the field, even with a lower time to throw based on their speed and everything. So I feel confident in the Dolphins offense because, you can't not throw the ball to Tyreek Hill, right? I am interesting, obviously, to see like what is Spags going to do? What's going to look different? Are you going to try and, have rotate and trap coverages where you're trying to just kind of catch Tua off once, but that matchup is going to be just a lot of fun. Obviously, I wish we could just turn injuries off, whether it's the flu, whether it's an ankle, whether it's an arm, anything. Like, let's just turn injuries off. That would be really, really cool. It would give us all, I think, just better games to watch. I'm trying to think if there's a specific, I don't know, like, do you lean the Dolphins a little bit in that game, or do you think the Chiefs defensive line will be able to kind of shut things down there?
Yeah, I mean, it's close. Like, if I was setting the line, it would be pretty close to a pick 'em for me, but I slightly lean Chiefs just because of what you mentioned, the defensive line against the Dolphins offensive line. And then I guess I just have kind of faith in the Chiefs offense at this point, figuring it out eventually. But it should be a great game. And when you have these international games where there's travel involved, and it kind of becomes a short week, even though the game's played on a Sunday, because you lose a day of prep and practice. There does get increased variance in this game. So I'm hoping that we don't see variance just swing in one direction and it lead to blowout. Like, I think this could be a really fun game. So hopefully it lives up to the expectations for sure. What do you think prediction wise in this game?
Oh, Tej, we don't talk about lines. We don't talk about bets. We don't talk about picks here. But yeah, I would I think, lean towards the Dolphins. Maybe we'll get offline. We'll get a little wager between us. Maybe one of us has to dress up as a lion or something for the next show. We'll see. But last time, right, we had that Mahomes golf game in Mexico. So maybe Patrick Mahomes, he's able to do it well on the road in international games. But let's keep it going, Tej. I know you were in New York this past weekend. You were watching that Jets-Giants game in a bar, and that's why it seems like your voice is lost. Why don't you just talk real quick? If we still got listeners with us, how was watching that Jets-Giants game live in New York?
Yeah, so I've been in New York for the past week. So apologize if my audio quality isn't as good as it usually is. But yeah, so I was at a bar watching Jets Giants, and then there were other games on as well. But I became so fixated on Jets Giants because it was such a beautiful mess of a football game. The Giants tied the record for most yards, or least amount of yards dropping back in a game with negative 14 yards. They ended up with, they played an assortment of quarterbacks between Tyrod Taylor and Tommy DeVito. I wanted to say Danny DeVito, but I think Danny DeVito might have done a better job in this game for the Giants at quarterback. They had a 4%, not 4% passing success rate in this game, which was obviously 0th percentile, one of the worst performances. But it was so great being in this bar because you saw how passionate these fan bases were over this particular game that you were watching. They were trash talking each other. They were so into the game. And I was like, this is what real football fandom looks like, where even though your team is playing this ugly game in a rain, you're still able to trash talk and different stuff like that. So it was actually a great experience overall. Partly why I lost my voice was because I was yelling about every single thing that happened in that game. It was really fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, no Tommy DeVito slander here. He went to Don Bosco Prep, which is a high school up in northern New Jersey, one of the best high school football programs in the nation. So we're going to take no slander there. But yeah, what a hilarious. I love that you meant like a beautiful slop, just like you can't look away from it in any sort of way. But let's get off of that. So Ravens Seahawks, we talked about the Ravens offense a bunch this year. I like how they felt more spread out. Lamar Jackson, he had this like hilarious touchdown throw on Sunday where he's kind of like kicking his leg up while throwing in the opposite direction, just like a funky thing. But I do think Seattle's defense is putting things together. They make that big trade through the deadline. They're fitting the run really well from, I think, nickel groupings where they're happy to rotate a safety in, or especially that nickel kind of off the edge. I think that changes how they work up front a little bit. So I think I want to see how do the Seahawks play the Ravens when their Ravens are in 11 personnel. Can the Ravens run the ball in those situations where I do think Seattle is going to be strong there? And then on the opposite side, Geno Smith just always entertaining, such a confident thrower of the ball where it can end up as a big play, it can end up as a turnover-worthy play, but he is going to throw that vertical shot into tight windows. So we haven't talked really, I think, a lot about Shane Waldron, but they're creating different ways to mitigate some of their pass protection issues they've had. They'll have like 2 tight ends to a side in the backfield. And what I think on the outside, it can like look like a gimmick, but it just always feels purposeful. And they're doing that to make things easier on other parts of their offense. So how are you feeling about that Seahawks-Ravens game?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like a lot of what you laid out there. Very excited for this game as well. I think what's going to be really interesting is seeing how these teams get into their explosives. The Ravens rank fourth on the season in explosive play rate. The Seahawks rank fifth. So these teams have been really explosive. They've been able to get into them a lot. And we know that these defenses have also been really good at not allowing explosives, especially the Ravens defense. So are you going to see those shot plays to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett that Geno is able to execute at a really high level? Or are you going to see them more matriculate down the field, Kenneth Walker handoffs, shorter passes to DK and Tyler Lockett and the tight ends and different stuff like that is what I'm curious to see, because it is going to be tough to test the Ravens on those types of plays. And then on the other end, is your explosive going to be Lamar running, because this defensive line is really well at the interior, but not good, but not as good at the exterior. And maybe you can go after Bobby Wagner and the different linebackers that the Seahawks have, or is it going to be more of Zay Flowers and trying to get Odell Beckham involved and obviously Mark Andrews? So that's what I think is going to be really interesting to follow in this game, is where are they going to get those 15 plus yard plays from?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think on the other side, McDonald Waldron, like that is a really, really fun matchup that's going to be good to go through. And then another one, just finishing off, Bills Bengals. I mean, we got to see what Lou Anarumo has in store for the Bills this time. Obviously, we talked about their big win against the 49ers. On the TV copy, they showed Big Lou on the sideline once, and he looked so fired up. I don't know if he was yelling at a ref, if he was yelling at a player, or if he was yelling into the air, but it just felt like he was yelling over to the 49ers, hey, I got you on this one. And last year he was able to kind of put Josh Allen and the Bills offense in a headlock with different creepers, really well-timed rotations. And the Bills saw that in the snow. And as you know, my feelings on weather affecting games, we should turn the weather off as well as injuries off. But is Allen going to be comfortable, taking some of those checkdowns over and over while still accessing explosive plays against the secondary where you don't have Jesse Bates anymore? And so that game's going to be hour 12 of our marathon Sunday. So how are you feeling about Bills Bengals on, I think it's Sunday night?
Yeah, Sunday night game. Very, very cool. Great choice here. Especially compared to the game last week on Sunday night that I grinded most of. But I think, it's hard to look at the stats in this game because these teams are so fundamentally different now than they were even 4 weeks ago. The Bengals kind of looked dead in the water 4 weeks ago. I think they're going to do this every year where they start slow and just really pick it up, later in the season here. The Bills have both struggled on offense and defense these past 4 weeks than compared to the beginning of the season, but it's obviously been more so on the defense with all the injuries they've got and them not being able to do a lot of the stuff they want to do. So you can't look at a ton of stats for this game. You have to just go more on this kind of updated priors that you had of whatever team you had or thinking of earlier in the year. So I do like the Bengals in this spot. When you look at what the Bengals were doing early to the Bills in the game that ended up getting canceled, and then even that playoff game, they were able to do whatever they wanted against the Bills defense in both of those games, even though we only got 5 quarters of football to watch out of all of that. So I think that the Bengals are going to have their way on offense again in this game. Now that you have Joe Burrow at 100% and the connection to Jamar Chase is back there, and we haven't even seen a T. Higgins blow-up game yet, which could happen eventually, even in this game. So I like the Bengals in this spot from that perspective. And then, yeah, like you mentioned, Lou Anarumo, these are the types of games where he studies these opponents in the offseason. He makes sure he wants to have these AFC playoff game plans. And this is kind of like a playoff game for the Bengals as well. So I'm feeling very optimistic about the Bengals in this game.
Just look at you disavowing stats and saying you got to update prior things. Yeah, I think I understand. I think the point you make there is important because to me, it's so important. What are the fundamentals of that team? The Cowboys matchup with the 49ers, they just do not match up well with the 49ers. I'm not sure if they ever will. And to me, they match up a lot better with the Eagles. And so when we look at, the Cowboys got absolutely blown out by a top NFC team. And now they go into another matchup where I think they're going to play this team a lot closer. And part of that is so stylistic. And I love that you mentioned, especially when we talk about Bills Bengals. Yeah, Zach Taylor just he's cooking. When he sees the Bills on the other side, I think he's very confident there. So we got 4 huge matchups next week. Chiefs, Dolphins, Seahawks, Ravens, Eagles, Cowboys, Bills, Bengals. I'm sure that those like have to be we'll probably pick 3 of those maybe next week to talk about. So Tish, you got anything else before we leave here for Halloween? Hopefully everyone, buys. Are you a sugar candy or like a chocolate candy guy? I know neither of us really eat a lot of candy, but where do you fall on that?
Yeah, I'm a huge when I do eat candy, I'm obsessed with Reese's cups, like peanut butter chocolate, anything peanut butter chocolate. I need those so like I stress eat during games of my favorite team. Sometimes if there's food in front of me, I'll stress eat. So like if you put like a bowl of carrots in front of me, like even though I'm not a huge carrots guy, like I'll just be eating those. If there's a box of like Reese's cups in front of me, like that box will be empty by the end of the game. So I need to stay away from the peanut butter chocolate. But I don't know what candies that you like to snack on when you do get into those.
Yeah, I try my best to avoid as much as I can, but 100% sugar candy. So I'm going to say you're objectively wrong on this one. Carrots just taking a shot there for no reason, just to stray. But yeah, chocolate, peanut butter, a great combination, much like Stats and Schemes. So appreciate everyone listening to another episode of us. Keep the feedback coming. Tell us what you like. Obviously, everything has been so kind so far, but tell us what you don't like too. Tell us if Tay should dress up as a lion next week. We'll see about that one. But be sure to listen to Eric and Thomas on Mondays and Wednesdays. They're just doing an awesome job talking about a lot of really cool topics. I think this week they talked about the trade deadline. We'll have another fun show tomorrow. Visit the website, consumersports.com. Make our bosses happy. Take a look at some of the tables, the player tables, and enjoy the rest of your week. And we'll see you next time.